The last arc of the Darth Vader comic was Burning Seas, and the next one, called Fortress Vader, will start in August. But in between, Charles Soule wrote somewhat of a standalone story called Bad Ground, in which Grand Moff Tarkin hunts Darth Vader. On an outer rim planet called Chandar's Folly, Tarkin takes 19 men along with him to hunt Vader, although as we join the story, only 8 of them are left. Vader outwits the crew until only Tarkin remains. The Grand Moff flees into the Stormlands, luring the Sith Lord to a place where he will be struck by lightning. That is when the hunt is revealed to have been requested by Vader, and Tarkin agrees, fulfilling a personal favor he promised in the past. Having destroyed as many surviving Jedi as he could, Vader wonders if there are any non-Force users in the galaxy that could challenge him. Even though Tarkin proved that to be the case, Vader uses his final bit of strength to start choking the life out of him, making the hunt more or less a draw. They are picked up for rescue and taken away for medical attention. The first thing I want to talk about in this comic is timeline. Wikipedia places this story after the novel Tarkin by James Luceno, which means it should be about 5 years after Revenge of the Sith, or 4 years after the previous arc, Burning Seas. That event on Mon Cala gave us the origin story for the favor Tarkin owes Vader when the Moff requests Vader secure King Lee Char rather than apprehend the Jedi he was sent to kill. So of course this issue takes place at a later date. Jumping ahead 4 years seems like a lot, but if you recall, the Burning Seas arc was originally meant to be 3 years after Episode 3 instead of 1. Tarkin talks about how Vader learned of his past on Eriadu, where he grew up learning to be a ruthless hunter. All of that is detailed in the novel Tarkin, and we also get a story where the Moff and Vader have to hunt down a small rebel cell, so it makes sense that Vader would learn about Tarkin's past during that mission. Something that kind of throws a wrench in things is the appearance of Tarkin's personal ship, the Carrion Spike, which was damaged at the end of the book. But we do know it was repaired at some later date, so maybe that repair was a rush job. It's hard to say, and maybe the Fortress Vader arc will help us firm up the timeline a little next month. But until then, let's talk about some of the other cool moments in the comic. At one point, Tarkin attacks Vader with flamethrowers and notices a hint of fear. Of course that makes sense, considering how Vader wound up in the mechanical suit in the first place. It's interesting, in the original Vader comic by Kieran Gillen, there's a point where he encounters lava and doesn't even flinch. I always thought at least a little hesitation would have been good to see, but I find it reasonable that he'd get over that fear over the course of the next 14 or 15 years. I also like that he doesn't have a full-on panic attack about fire. He treats it more as an annoyance, like he'd really rather not deal with fire, but of course he will. There are some discussions about Vader's range when using the Force. How close does he have to be to snap a neck or Force choke somebody? I think that in theory there is no range on the Force. We've seen Palpatine choke Dooku from across the galaxy. In Empire, we see Vader choke Ozzel across a 19-kilometer ship. I think that with enough skill and connection to the Force, you could technically Force choke anyone, anywhere. But at this point in time, I can accept that Vader is not at his full potential. It might be that he doesn't reach that full potential until he truly lets go of the memories of his past, like Padme, or like the person he used to be, and that's all something we get to see in the original Vader comic that I mentioned before. Basically, I think during Tarkin's hunt, Vader is still terrifyingly strong, but not as strong as he could be. I think Palpatine senses that too, because we see him testing Vader in the book Lords of the Sith, and he seems very pleased with his apprentice at the end of the first Vader comic when he finally lets old things die. And one last thing I want to discuss is what actually killed Vader in Return of the Jedi. I've always assumed it was the Force lightning, but now we've seen Vader struck by lightning, and we even saw Palpatine use Force lightning on him in the first issue of this comic. I do still think he was ultimately killed by Force lightning in Episode 6. I'd guess it was just a matter of how much electricity and lightning, because he soaks up a lot in the movie. More than one strike or one little blast. Palpatine could have been throwing everything he had into Vader at the time. I wanted to address that just because I saw some people asking about it. But that's all I have to say about this comic. As usual with Charles Soule's series, it was fantastic. It showed us a lot of new and exciting things, but also connected thematically with a number of other stories spread throughout the timeline. Great storytelling as far as I'm concerned, and I'll throw out my recommendation to read this comic if you never have. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out my Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.